This conference will now be recorded.
There you go, Betty.
Okay, very good. You're welcome to go ahead and start policy committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the July 9th, 2020 Policy Committee. We're going to start with the minutes review. Draft policy committee minutes were circulated. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Yep. Dr. Bechtel made the motion and Betty Montgomery seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that carries. And we'll move on to the rule review update. So I'll turn that over to Kim Anderson.
All right, thank you. So we've had, as you can see from the rules schedule, we've had some activity in June. We have a number of rules filed at JCAR, and we have a public hearing scheduled for July 23rd. So that's coming up. So that's helping us catch up. We also had 5 no change rules filed, and those will be effective in September. Then we still have a number of rules at CSI and a number of rules ready to file with CSI that we're working through. And then I'm going to talk to you today about 2 sets of rules that are at CSI, and we've received comments. So we'll talk through what those comments are as well. But any questions on just the general rule filing and the rule spreadsheet? Okay, thank you.
So now there's no motion required. That was just for your information, I believe. So we will move on to the comments received at CSI regarding light-based medical device rule and the CME rules. Okay,
so as you can see, we received a number of comments. We received comments from 14 different individuals regarding the light-based rules. And just to remind you procedurally, these rules have taken a very long path. They were first proposed in early 2018. We received a number of comments at that point, some of them alleging a possible antitrust issue. Some of the comments that we've recently received also state that so we did send the rules through the CSI antitrust review in December. Those came out indicating not a concern from CSI, and so we moved forward. I do think the area of concern that the comments are wide-ranging, but I think the area of concern I would like to focus on today is involving the physician assistants and structural concerns about PAPC. And I think we want to be responsive to those concerns. And we do have a PAPC meeting scheduled for August 17th. And so what I would like to do is take these, put it on the agenda for the August 17th PAPC meeting and really dig in and get more information from PAPC about their concerns about these rules, and then come back to you in September with their recommendations. And then I would also say, in the meantime, we are seeing these comments are wide ranging. So I would also like to have the committee allow us to work with Dr. Bechtel a bit, who's been instrumental in the drafting of these rules, so we can kind of work through the comments and make sure that we're providing a good draft back to the board and a good response to CSI to these comments. So I'd like to go and do that work and then come back in September and present this to you. they will stay at CSI until we have provided comments back to CSI. But I feel like, we need to make sure that, we've got all the information that we need to respond to those comments. And I don't feel like we have that quite yet.
This is Dr. Bechtel. I agree. I think it's important to get really good input from the PA committee. I think if they could review that again and we could really look at their concerns or comments and then respond to those, that would be very important. In the materials that you provided on the comments, I didn't see a copy of articles that were presented by the Cleveland Clinic. Do you know if we could get copies of those, or maybe?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, those should have come to you, and so we'll send those around. So I do apologize.
Kim, we're talking generally about light-based rules with the PAPC, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, it's so nice to have somebody who both on the board as well as your staff. These rules are so complex and sort of you cross your eyes when you read them. So it's nice to have somebody who's paying attention. Query would be, do we not have a process to follow this statute earlier so the PACP doesn't have to come back to us and complain that we didn't talk to them ahead of time, so
right.
that still like you do with all of our other licensees, allied licenses, that we could bring them in here? Do we have a process?
We do. We do. I think we're in the process of transitioning the staff that work with PAPC. I think the problem here, I think it's unique to this set of rules. I think what happened was, they went to PAPC in 2018, and then they went to CSI for the antitrust review. A long period of time, probably nearly 2 years passed before they came out of CSI. And I think we just had a disconnect at that point. And so I think, the criticism is well taken, and, we certainly don't want to be in that situation. But I think it was unique to the particular path that these rules followed.
So we in the future, as we lubricate our relationships with everybody, that can be taken care of. It does sound like it's unique. May I ask, Mr. Chairman, are we going to speak about any of the specific comments? Because if I might ask, or is that later in the agenda?
No, I'm entertaining comments now, so feel free to proceed.
So may I ask a question about tattoo removal? There were a number of comments. We pay attention. We have not revisited medical device usage on tattoos, but we do that. We seem to be inconsistent in the way we're handling tattoos, depending upon its removal or whether it's a medical or a non-medical. It just seems to me, I think they refer to New Jersey. So it just seems to me that there seems to be some legitimacy in the way we're handling tattoo removal. And again, I'm not a doctor. So what I am is looking at what looks to be some inconsistencies in the way we are handling the tattoo stuff. So I wondered if you might be able to respond to that, or somebody.
I could comment on that. What our goal was with these new rules and regulations was to expand the ability beyond physicians to be able to delegate to others the ability to do lasers. And when we looked at the different laser technologies, one of our biggest concerns is patient safety. We don't want to push forward with something that could result in a lot of patient complications. So we looked at vascular lasers as one of the lasers that has one of the least likelihoods of causing patient irreversible changes. So our thought was that if we could maybe move forward in expanding non-physicians to be able to do these procedures, we want to go with the safest laser first. We can always expand or add new lasers later on. Tattoo removal, Betty, is really tricky. You have to have the right laser to treat the right pigment. It's very difficult to determine which laser should be utilized. Tattoo removal can often result in scarring that can be pretty significant. So it's one of the laser techniques that has requires greater skill and thought, medical background, and has the potential for patient complications. So that's something that could be potentially added later on. But in concerns for patient safety, I think the vascular lasers seem to be the best technology to expand. And again, just referring to patient safety, because that was kind of expressed in some of the comments, the learning and training to do vascular lasers is very, very robust. We have 8 hours of education. They have to observe 15 procedures and then perform 20 procedures under direct physician supervision before they can have the authority to go ahead and do this. So there's a lot of education built into this. The physician also has to evaluate the patient before a non-physician would do the procedure, and then has to evaluate the patient after that first procedure to make sure there's no complications. So a lot of really built-in education and patient safety.
So at this point, you're comfortable with where we are on the proposed rules on, despite the complaints, you think we've addressed them. Again, I'm not a doctor, so I would just certainly defer to all of you that are doctors in this area.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with that.
One other thing that I would add is just that I believe Department of Health has rules surrounding tattooing procedures and removal. So I think that was in my discussions with Dr. Bechtel early on, we did not go in that direction because it was falling under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health.
Thank you.
I have a question. Mark, hair removal, what about that? Where does that fall in this? I guess there's over-the-counter devices for hair removal right now, right? Which are obviously less intense in terms of the laser potential on it. But what's your feel for that? I mean, that one's kind of, for me, that one was kind of, is that a big ticket item?
Well, many of the over-the-counter hair removal devices essentially just singe away hair. They're thermal, they're hot, and you apply to a hair follicle and it singes it off just due to heat.
Okay.
So they're not related to lasers at all.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yes, Dr. Sutton.
Just want to follow the laser. You still find that would be problematic then for non-physicians?
Lasers are currently, laser hair removal is already approved by legislation and rules and regulations as far as the use of RNs, PAs, and cosmetic therapists.
Oh, okay.
So that's one form of lasers that's already been carved out, has been for a while. If I'm correct, Nathan, is that right? The laser hair removal.
I didn't realize cosmetics were cosmetic technicians. Okay, cosmetic technicians are in there too?
That's in the term.
Sorry, Nate?
Correct, Dr. Bechtel.
There's no, you don't even have to be a delegation from a physician. It can just be a cosmetic. Who does it?
To the best of my knowledge, that has to be delegated.
Okay, it does need to be delegated. Okay, so it's not a unilaterally they can do it. Okay, that's my question. Okay,
Correct.
and you feel that's still appropriate, right?
Yes, those rules and regulations have been in place for a while.
Right.
Can you,
I understand that, but I mean, do you think that the safety parameters are there, should necessitate that delegation? Is my question. Do you think they can do it on their own with the proper training, or do you think it has to be delegated? That's my question.
Well, I think that one of the problems with laser hair removal is the proper selection of the patient, and some of the hair follicles that are, for instance, really dark do very well with laser hair removal, where some of the patients with really fine white hair, it does not do well at all. And so it's important in patient selection to select patients that really will truly respond and do well. Patients of color with darker skin may have a greater risk of laser complications with scarring and pigmentation. So I think it's important to select that patient who can be treated safely and select that patient who's going to be most beneficial as far as the treatment is concerned.
Okay. My only concerns from an antitrust standpoint, does it look like we're boxing out people that are, you know, somehow subject for something that a lot of people might say, what's the big deal? That's my only concern here.
Yeah. The new rules and regulations actually expand the ability to do lasers. They don't restrict those.
Okay. And you know, when looking at this, and again, I'm sorry to beat this dead horse, but given the technological improvements in hair laser technology, have we looked at that? And is something changed in terms of, you know, the safety parameters or the efficacy of those products that might, you know, justify maybe a loosening of that requirement? That's, you know, that's probably my main question too. Because I mean, we talk about historically we've had this, but okay, historically we've had a lot of things. You know, moving forward, does the technology now get to the point where maybe there's enough safety parameters built into these medical devices that, you know, maybe you don't need to have a physician delegating it? Have we looked at that?
The rules and regulations, as we began to develop those, really did reflect looking back at all the latest technology and patient safety.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
If I recall, some of the materials that we submitted to CSI antitrust review involved at least one article related to the dangers of some injuries related to laser hair removal.
That's correct.
So that was something that they considered as well.
Well, what was the dating on that article, though?
But to be honest, I believe it was in the 2010s. I don't remember the exact date. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yes, Dr. Schottenstein.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to circle back for a moment to PAPC, because PAPC is supposed to have a medical board member on PAPC. We don't currently have one. And so I just thought I would, take the opportunity to mention that and see if anybody has an interest in being appointed to that committee.
And that's one, Michael, that you can do over the phone. You don't have to be in person for that, correct? And
Right.
it doesn't that often either.
Right. So I'm glad to do it if nobody's particularly interested, but I just wanted to offer and see if anybody has an interest and would be so inclined.
When does it meet typically? Do you know?
I think it's once a quarter, isn't it, Michael?
That's my understanding. Yeah, I think it's like, I think they're relatively quick meetings. I mean, I don't have a lot of familiarity with this, with the PAPC, but my understanding is they're relatively quick meetings. They can occur over the phone, and they're roughly quarterly, if I've got that right.
John,
You're correct. You're correct with that. Doctor, they had been scheduled for Friday mornings quarterly to accommodate Dr. Edgin's schedule. This next one is scheduled for August 17th. I think we can be flexible with the scheduling, and it is one that is permitted, always to be held via phone or video.
When Nita left, and we got Richard to do it, Rick Edgin to do it, and they're really it's pretty quick and very few meetings.
I'm happy to do it.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Feibel. So can we make that appointment, Kim? All right.
And it may come from Jill, but yes, thank you. We will do that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sloan.
So if there are no other comments on the light-based device rule, do we have to do anything in terms of formal action, Kim, or can we move on to the CME rules?
No, I think, let me just double check my memo just to make sure. And I'm having trouble with all my screens, but I think just having us go to PAPC and come back in September, I don't think you need to vote on that.
We will move on to the CME rules.
Okay. For CME rules, you will see, so this has historically been handled with the licensure committee, but since licensure committee wasn't meeting and since, policy committee does rules, so we're bringing this to you. So there were a number of changes to the CME rules that were made and approved based on statutory change. All of the comments center on one rule, which is 473110-02. And so we've received comments from the associations, I believe 5 associations, with respect to the addition of CME on failure to report, which was a recommendation from the Strauss work group. And so we do have a number of comments on that. I'm not recommending that you make a change to that because, that change was made due to the Strauss work group, and that's an expectation for the board. Then the second item, we received comments from the OOA about the CME for osteopathic physicians. I have a draft for you to address their comment by removing the category 2A. There's also some technical fixes within the rule that we found as we were working on it, and so I'd also like that. I would also say yesterday or Monday late, we received comments from Dr. Johnson about that removal of the category 2A, and her comments were provided to you. I think we should have a discussion and talk about that and understand Dr. Johnson's concerns. I will also say that at 8:24 this morning and 8:48 this morning, I received additional comments from the OOA. I don't have time to, go through those. I can certainly provide those to you later. But there are lengthy comments from the OOA received at 8:48 this morning. So I think we should talk with Dr. Johnson and get some more information.
I agree. Dr. Johnson, are you able to provide us some comments?
I can. So the category, there are different categories in CMEs for the AOA and versus the OOA. And looking at the changes that were proposed for the draft in terms of 2A, 2B, and 2C, you have category 1A only. And my understanding was that the OOA would like those to be just category 1, not 1A. Is that what you got in the most recent information, Kim?
I don't think so. What I thought, and I could certainly use some assistance with this, but my understanding was that the OOA was in favor of removing category 2A.
That is correct. The category 2A, if you look at the AOA CME categories, category 2A is basically that are, do you all hear that feedback? Is that from all of us or just whomever's speaking? Okay, I'll try this again. Category 2A are courses that are taught by allopathic institutions. And the AOA requested for that to be removed because they're feeling, or the OOA, I apologize, the OOA requested the removal of those because those courses do not have any osteopathic training component to them. And that is what was referenced in the original letter, Kim, that you received from the OOA. Basically, 2A are just credits that if you go to a CME at an allopathic institution or you do an online learning from an allopathic institution. And currently the way that, or in the past, the way that it was set up was that if you had those type of credits, you would have to either have those 2A credits converted to category 1 credits, either via the AOA or the OOA. And their concern is that if the osteopathic physician only has allopathic CMEs, then they are not continuing the tradition of osteopathy. Would you say that's their summary, Kim, from what you read?
I think you are correct. Yes, there is a definite concern that osteopathy is a separate philosophy practice based on different components. Yes.
So I think what's important is that the way the rules or the draft is set up is in, for number 2, it says that the educational activities recognized by the American Osteopathic Association as category 1A pursuant to its CME categorization system. I think that 1A is the component that I had some concerns about, along with how that's continued through 2A, 2B, 2C. And if it was just a category 1 only, and we take out that letter A, then it gives osteopathic physicians the opportunity to still take the AMA courses or whatnot. They would still have to get those courses approved either by the OOA or the AOA. And I think if that is allowed, then the OOA just happy with what it was. And then if that is the case, then it's redundant to have number 3.
Okay, let me just make sure that I am understanding this correctly. So in the draft for A2, A, B, and C, you would remove the A from 1A. Okay. And then you would also remove the paragraph 3.
Make sure that we are satisfying them as well as us.
Okay.
And my concern was if it just says category 1A and I go for my CMEs, then all of my CMEs have to be osteopathic approved CMEs. It limits my ability or any other osteopathic physician's ability to get CMEs. For an OBGYN, there are very few osteopathic approved osteopathic CMEs. My hope is that will change because institutions that are now, having osteopathic physicians in their residency programs are probably going to become AOA approved. So that should change as we move forward. But for right now, it's very difficult. I actually looked it up yesterday. and there was only one opportunity for me to get 5 CMEs, which does not help me at all in terms of meeting my CME requirement.
Thank you. I think if I could have a motion that, so what I'm looking for is providing a response to CSI on the comments. And so I think for the first set of comments, I think I would like a motion that we do not, make a change for the reason that it's coming from the work group. For the comments regarding OOA, if I could have a motion that I could work with Dr. Johnson to develop the board's response and work with OOA. If it's substantive and we feel like we need to bring it back, we can, but we're just providing comments at this point. So if I could have a motion to do that, and then I have 2 or 3 technical fixes in the rule, if I could have that as well. So I know that's kind of convoluted, but does that work as a motion moving forward?
Yeah. Move.
Okay. Are they separate motions? A motion to work with Dr. Johnson to provide comments and a motion for technical fixes, or do you want to do them both at once?
I think we could do it all at once.
So is to allow Dr. Johnson and Ms. Anderson to work on comments as well as the technical fixes.
So moved.
So like Dr. Bechtel motioned and Mr. Giacalone seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. And so now I suppose we'll move on to telehealth and the legislative update.
Thanks, Dr. Excuse me. Thanks, Dr. Stein. So I'll take the lead on the telehealth discussion for us. The last time that we met on June 10th, this bill 679 was actually moving through the legislature that day. And where we are right now with telehealth is that it has moved through the House. It's back in the Senate. We have some time this summer to really work through the House version of the bill so that we can start reaching out to members of the Senate with some of the board's concerns. So the summer provides us a nice opportunity to do that. Again, I think we all acknowledged at the last meeting what a big shift this is in our care delivery system, and there have been some really great advantages for both physicians and patients throughout the pandemic relative to telehealth. And so we're looking forward to being able to continue those for the future. But right now, I think what we need to do is focus on what we want to take back to the Senate with feedback on the currently drafted legislation. So in your board materials, I reposted the memo that we had sent to you via email right after the last board meeting. So there's nothing new in that memo. It's just there for your reference. And what we did with, actually, there are 3 memos. There's the top memo that's sort of the issue spotting memo that we'll walk through right now. And then behind that, we have 2 memos that were provided to you, excuse me, by council that really sort of go into the explanation of the law as it applies to the board. And so those are privileged memos behind that. They are complementary, so they build upon each other and need to be read together. And so I think the best way to walk through some of what we need to get feedback from you so that we can continue forward with our legislative strategy with this is just sort of breaking down the issues as we identified those in the bill. We did receive some good feedback from some of our members here, and we consolidated that feedback as well as the feedback from the last board meeting into the sort of grid that is, I'm sure, rather hard for you to read with the print. So make your screens bigger on that print. I think that the first issue that we need to talk about is that the bill as drafted does not account for our current in-person requirements or any additional in-person requirements, right? So today we have the requirements for certain opiate rules or weight loss medicine rules and first in-person visits. And so what we would propose as a staff, just generally, is that we are supportive of this bill as a board, but that we need to have some guardrails put around what some of those in-person visits look like. We had good discussion last time that we don't want to be too restrictive on that because we see the value of the bill's purpose in helping those harder to reach populations or more vulnerable populations. But there are some things that we need to look at to say, we need some guardrails, we need some in-person visits. And so I think what we need feedback from you all is what those in-person visits look like, and when we would how we need to advocate for that ability. And then at the second point on that grid is also relative to the initial in-person visit. Should we be requiring an initial in-person visit before we dive into telehealth with a patient? It is not part of the bill right now. I think we heard from the board last time that there are some types of visits that you just have to be able to do first in person, and making sure that the board fully agrees with that requirement. So I'm just going to kind of preview, and then I think we take a deep dive into how we want to approach these different points. The bill is also not clear on standard of care, right? So if we're doing telehealth and we're changing the way we're delivering care, establishing that standard of care will be important. And I think that our recommendation is that we go forward with rulemaking authority on that we be able to dictate what that standard of care looks like in rule. I think an easy fix for us to advocate for is that we sort of have some current conflicts with our out-of-state practice requirements. I think we can offer some language that harmonizes that approach. And then finally, we have some questions for you on the mode of communication with licensees. We heard from some of you that it's very important to see your patient via video as often as possible. We also heard the recognition that with those harder to reach populations, potentially in areas that are lacking broadband or in more vulnerable populations or even technologically challenged populations, that they may not be able to do video, so that we might have to rely exclusively on the phone. So those are kind of all of the big issues that we spotted for you. I think probably that we can work through those one by one today. One of the questions that we have posed for you is that we talked about last time, and I think we just need to really wrap up definitively, is how do we want to handle telehealth going forward? After looking back through the minutes and hearing feedback from you, I think we have some different ideas on this. Is this a standing agenda item that we keep as part of the policy committee? Right, that's option one. The second option would be that we create an ad hoc committee. And then I guess those are our two. So do we keep it in policy, or do we create a separate committee? Or do we create, I guess the third option would be a subcommittee of the policy committee, which is really no different than the ad hoc committee. So I think maybe that might be our starting point, is to say, how do we want to handle telehealth for the future? And then we can sort of figure out how we want to get feedback from you on these specific points.
Great. Thank you for that helpful update. And I think as an initial point, I think having it on the agenda of policy committee so we can get collective feedback on the board is probably a really good idea. And, whether we have a separate committee that could be more rapidly or specific board feedback too, and I would defer to other people. I know Dr. Sean, and so I would.
Oh, so thank you very kindly. So I guess in terms of generally going forward, we've got these two general directions we can go in. One is to support as a default the expansion of telehealth, and then set guardrails around specific areas of concern. And the other way is to support as a default the restriction of telehealth with specific expansions. And I guess my thought is that I feel that the first choice is the correct one. I think telehealth has the ability to fundamentally improve the health of the citizens of Ohio. And I think we would be right as a default to support the expansion where possible. I would also point out, Stephanie, on these grids that you have the original grid and then the one that was updated. So on the original grid, you were kind enough to change my comment because on the original grid, it indicated I was in favor of, it indicated I was in favor of the in-person visits. And I appreciate that with the original change, you changed that to say that, in fact, I'm in favor of telehealth. When you did the updated grid, though, it went back to my original comments where it says I support requirement for in-person. If that can be, changed back again.
Sure, we'll change that for the long term.
Thanks very kindly. I think that was changed because the original grid also said that OSU supported in-person visits. But when I went back to look at the letter that they, presented when they testified in their testimony, it indicated that they did not support the in-person. So you all changed that on the second one, yes?
Yes. Yeah.
You're awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the question on the table right now is how do we want to keep talking about telehealth in the long term, right? And we'll get into those specific items.
Mr. Chairman, I think we are at a fundamental crossroads, as we all know, with going forward with telehealth. And it really does seem to me, to be honest with you, if this board, it is obstructionist to telehealth, which I don't think we are, we'll be run over by the legislature anyway. I think there has been too much convenience discovered out of this pandemic and telehealth in many ways to the constituents, to the patients. On the other hand, and I'm not speaking to what it means to the doctors, I got lost a little bit in the cost sharing arguments and that, which is the finances in the medical world, which I'm not familiar with. But I do think it's so important that it probably deserves its own committee, whether it's standing committee or ad hoc, where we can have more in-depth conversations with not only ourselves to bring back to perhaps the policy committee, and then we can bring to the board if it's ad hoc or however you'd want to handle it, Mr. Chairman. But both Mr. Chairmans, Mike and Dr. Swain, Michael or Dr. Swain. But I just think we really do need a committee to really study this in detail and harmonize. We'll have a case today in which you can see, I think, the dangers of telehealth when not appropriately guardrailed. And I just think it's time for us to think, because this is a major change for us, and I think we need to do it right. And I think we all agree on that. So I bet it also pulls us into the question of, as we are commenting on legislation, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we've resolved, the policy committee hasn't resolved a process for when we weigh in and when we generally weigh in, knowing that you have to give flexibility to your liaisons in the legislature.
Yes, thank you for those thoughtful comments. And I think we're prepared to make a decision to Stephanie's question. So it's clear to me that every month the policy committee will be having an update on telemedicine. And it's also clear that we're going to need a small group committee, whether it's a formalized one or how to do it, to be able to answer questions and to weigh in. And I encourage all medical board members to also reach out to Stephanie, Kim, Dr. Schottenstein, or myself with specific comments they have that we can circulate, because we're going to have to stay on top of this. Regarding your second comment, Ms. Montgomery, on the agenda, which we probably won't get to today just due to the interest of time at this meeting, but we will go over it in the full board if we run out of time, is the legislative communication, which is the last agenda item on the legislative update. And so I can tell you, just because we're running short on time here, we may not address that specific comment at this exact meeting, but we will address it today at the full board. In the interest of time, I think, Stephanie, maybe we can see what important items you need to ask for our last 5 minutes here, and the rest of the stuff we can actually capture at full board during my my update.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you, Dr. Swain. So I would propose that since we are pulling this into a separate committee, that we actually, as staff, sort of look at the recommendations that we've listed out for you, putting everything together and all of the different feedback that we've received. I think it's fair to say that there is some appetite for some in-person requirements, and that it really does associate with standard of care, and that we need to make sure that we have standard of care rulemaking authority, and we can start those discussions on what standard of care looks like. So I think we have enough to go on to know where we can start, that we can start coming up with something to give you to react to with actual language and what we would then take forward for recommendation. So if okay with all of you, and seeing how the issues are laid out in the grid, those are the issues we've spotted. I think we have enough information, and we don't have anything where we have complete disagreement that we would need to settle on this committee to craft a response.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Stephanie, regarding the actual formation of a committee, do we need to do that now?
I think it would be helpful if we do it now, because then we can send what we come up with to all of you and move that forward. What do you think, Kim?
Actually, I think we can talk about it here, but I think it actually needs to be a board vote.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do in the interest of time, since we only have 2 minutes. For those of you on the board, obviously, think about whether or not you'd like to serve on the committee in an official capacity in between the board meetings or whenever we have them, or if you just want to participate in policy committee and weigh in when you get more recommendations. And we'll discuss that at the formal board. Moving on to the last item regarding legislative update, I do want to devote time to this, but we'll do that at the formal board meeting, because I think it's important for everyone to hear all the good work that Stephanie, Kim, and the entire board team has been doing regarding how we're going to change the way we handle legislative and bill tracking, because there's a really nice memo in the minutes. I want to spend time on that. So is there any other things that require vote action at this committee? If not, we can move to adjourn and handle the rest of the business at the main meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second? All in favor say aye. Yep. Any opposed? I'm hearing no opposition. I'll adjourn the policy committee meeting, and we will discuss further at the main board meeting during my report. Thank you.
Thanks.